Experiencing a stress response isn't harmful per se. What makes it harmful is when our stress response is triggered and then remains chronically elevated over time.
Pain is useful in small doses. It's really helpful that if I put my hand on the flame, I pull it away.
Talking excessively about what's happening in our head can have negative relational effects.
Need motivation?
Watch a Top 10 with Believe Nation.
Top 10, I got a top 10. Got my motivation high for my top 10. Gotta learn from the wise women and men. All my life, like na 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 na. For my top 10, top 10, na 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 na. This one's for my top 10.
Hey, it's Evan Carmichael, and I make these videos because you are probably the most ambitious person in your circle, but you know you're capable of more, and you get that push by surrounding yourself with the best. So today, let's learn from one of the best, Dr. Ethan Kross, and my take on his top 10 rules for success. Enjoy. Okay, let's kick it off with rule number 1. Manage your thoughts.
We can't always control, we can't control the thoughts that pop up in our head. So we don't know why I'm going to be walking down the street and all of a sudden just have a really dark thought about this or a positive thought about something else. We don't have control over the thoughts that pop. But what we do have control over is how we engage with those thoughts once they surface.
Okay.
And we have a lot of control there. We can choose to immerse ourselves in the thoughts, and if we immerse ourselves in the positive thoughts, that can be great. Like when I'm out here in LA, I'm away from my kids and my family. I'm walking down the street, I'm thinking about my youngest daughter who tried to FaceTime me this morning at 4:30 in the morning, and it brought happiness to me just thinking about how cute that was, and it was inappropriate but cute at the same time.
Sure.
I immersed in it, I can also choose to distance myself from my thoughts or challenge my thoughts. So there's a range of things we can do when thoughts pop up. So and that's where the control comes in.
Rule number 2, experience stress.
Can chatter make us ill?
Well, I think the answer to that question is yes. And it's interesting because I think many people can easily relate to having the experience of stress. But throughout time, stress has been this kind of abstract thing that happens in your head. And things that happen in your head have lacked the same kind of concreteness. We can't feel it the same way that we can, we can feel a wound swell in our body or see like our arteries get filled with plaque and other things that lead to heart attacks and things like of that sort. So I think actually the brain imaging that has evolved over the past 20 years has helped a lot with that in terms of helping people see how stress can manifest in the brain and how that can in turn have downstream implications for our health. But the way this works, the snapshot that exists, so how does stress actually make us physically ill? One of the leading theories is the idea that as human beings, we are designed to experience stress, right? Experiencing stress is a really useful adaptive response to a threat in our environment. It's a good system to have. I wouldn't want my worst enemy to not be able to experience stress because they wouldn't survive well in the world. Experiencing a stress response isn't harmful per se. What makes it harmful is when our stress response is triggered and then remains chronically elevated over time. That exerts a wear and tear on the body that we are not designed for. And what helps keep our stress responses active over time? It's me getting an email last night that I wasn't so happy about and replaying that email in my head, hearing the words spoken over and over and over again, and replaying that email today and tomorrow, thinking how I'm going to respond. This may or may not be a hypothetical event, by the way. But it is our minds are capable of maintaining our stress responses. And when you get people who are ruminating or worrying for long stretches of time, that's what the mind is doing. It's keeping us in that stress state. And that has been shown to predict a host of physical maladies that range from cardiovascular disease to problems of inflammation to various forms of cancer. And so the link to our physical health is there. it's strong. And I think it's one of the 3 big reasons to really be concerned about chatter.
Rule number 3, transport yourself into the future.
Right now, look, many of us, I think, are worrying and ruminating about the pandemic, about our own health, the health of our loved ones, the fact that we're dealing with our kids at home. There's lots of sources of stress right now. And a lot of us are so tunnel visioned into that stress. That's all we're thinking about. And we can't get out of it. And so when that happens, one set of tools that can be really useful is shift your perspective, try to go broad. And there are lots of ways you could do that. Distant self-talk is one. Another tool I talk about in the book is something called temporal distancing. Fancy name, we could call that mental time travel. You think about, rather than getting stuck in, oh my God, how awful is the situation right now, think about how you're going to feel 6 months from now, when you're maybe sitting on the beach with 2 or 3 pina coladas and having a good time because you're vaccinated, right? Maybe it's not 6 months, maybe it's 9 months, but doing that, transporting yourself into the future, what that does is it makes it clear that as awful as what we're experiencing is right now, it's temporary. It's going to end. And that gives us hope, and hope is really powerful.
Rule number 4, don't allow negative thoughts.
Thoughts are mental events. They're things that pop up in our head. Whether they define us or not depends on whether we allow them to define us. And
what does that look like when we allow it to?
We can be strategic about that. So allowing myself to think of myself as someone who, I'm going to give you all the positive features here, right? So someone who has is intellectually curious, is a good friend, has humility. I allow those thoughts to define myself. I think that they are fairly accurate portrayals of who I am.
Right.
Those thoughts are constantly being tested in my life, right? Because I'm getting feedback when I interact with people, when I go on different kinds of events and people, say things like that informs whether that understanding of who I am is in touch with reality. I think we want to have that. But other kinds of thoughts, like self-defeating ones, I'm not good enough, this manuscript was rejected, or I really put my foot in my mouth. I mean, I put my foot in my mouth all the time. It hopefully won't happen during this conversation, but if I allowed myself to be defined by my foot in the mouth faux pas, I would not be a happy individual. So there's agency there. There is a choice to attach to some cognition, some thoughts, and not others.
Also, if you want to have more self-confidence and self-belief, I've designed a special free training to help you do it. The science says it can take up to 254 days of consecutive action to build a new habit. And I want that for you. I want you to build the habit of self-belief. So what I'm going to do is email you every day for 254 days a link to an unlisted video that will shift your belief forward. To get on it for free, the link to join is in the description below.
You were up and dressed and ready to go before your parents were up. You know why? Because you knew something unexpected was going to happen. That's how we should live our lives. Waking up with the understanding to expect the unexpected.
Successful people do what they hate to get to where they want to be.
If you're going to speak effectively, you have to know way more than you're talking about.
Rule number 5, harness your inner voice.
I think one of the things that can be really powerful is sharing with folks that really ultra successful people, we all struggle with this at times. I think this is part of the human condition, this ability to slip in to chatter. So thank you for doing that. The question of what the goal in my mind is not to turn the inner voice off. The goal is to harness it. So I actually tell the story in the book of a neuroanatomist who desperately wanted her inner voice shut off. And she got her wish, so to speak, tragically. I'm laughing, but it's a tragic event. She had a stroke, and it temporarily took out her language ability, her ability to use language, not just language as we use when we communicate with one another, but when we communicate with ourselves. Initially, she described the experience of not being able to talk to herself as liberating. Gone were the whispers and worries that made life unpleasant. But what also left her was the positive side of the inner voice, the ability to use language to simulate and plan for the future. I don't know what happened with your son, but I'm guessing it was some kind of problem. And I'm guessing you started thinking about it in an attempt to try to solve that problem in some way, to figure out, why was this happening? What can I do? Right? That's your beautiful brain trying to weigh in on this situation, to muster the resources you have to get to the bottom of it, but not working in your situation. We'll talk about why that often backfires later. So she lost that capacity to use language to control ourselves, to make sense of her experiences, to plan for the future. And that was really unproductive. So the challenge I think we all face is not to turn the inner voice off. It's to, when we find ourselves slipping into chatter, to nip that response in the bud as quickly as we can, to free up our inner voice to do the wonderful things it evolved to do, to help us plan, to help us simulate, to help us fantasize, and so forth and so on.
Rule number 6, step into universal you.
Let me give you another example of a different kind of linguistic shift that can be helpful. We call it the universal you. And to explain how it works, let me tell you a quick story about Sheryl Sandberg, Facebook COO, who several years ago tragically lost her husband on vacation, fell off a treadmill, or had a heart attack, fell off a treadmill, and died. Terrible, terrible story. She went into mourning, and after a 30-day mourning period was over, she wrote a post to her on her Facebook page. I'm going to butcher the quote here, so don't hold me to it. But effectively, what she wrote at one point in the quote was, she talked about her feelings, and she goes, "When you lose someone you love, you don't know what to do. Your heart just leaves you. You don't know how to move on." And what was really interesting about that quote was she was talking about probably the most personal kind of experience a person can have, like the loss of the love of their lives. But she's not talking about it in the first person. She's not saying, "When I lost someone I love, I didn't know what to do. My heart left me." She's using a word, you, that we typically use to refer to others. What she was essentially doing there by using the word you, she's talking about her own personal experience in universal terms. She's effectively saying, when anyone loses someone they love, anyone would feel terrible. Anyone's heart would leave their body. And so we've done studies on this, and what talking about your own experience in universal terms does, number one, it gives you a little bit of mental space from your experience. It's not just about you. This is how the world works. Anyone would deal with this adversity the way that I'm dealing with it, right? So it's pushing it away, and it's normalizing the experience in ways that make it much easier for people to make meaning out of the experience and work through it. And so it's benefiting you, but it's also doing one other really important thing. When I talk about my experience, my own personal experience, as relevant to the world, guess what? Johnny and AJ, you are part of the world. I'm sucking you into my experience. I'm connecting you. I'm establishing empathy. So it's a way of bringing people together as well. One word, you instead of I. And that's the power of language.
Rule number 7, talk to the right people.
If you look at the research, what you find is, indeed, certain ways of talking to other people can be remarkably helpful in helping us through our struggles. But if you talk to the wrong people the wrong way, they can actually make our problems worse. And this point is often lost. If you look right now at the advice that many public health organizations like the CDC are giving to folks who are struggling with the pandemic, go find other people to talk to. It is not that simple. And here's why. Oftentimes when we go to other people, we think that just venting our emotions, unloading what we're feeling, is the way to feel better. This is a very, very popular belief. What the research shows is that if let's say you and I hope we're now buddies, and let's say I call you up to talk to you about something that's really bothering me, I'm spinning over. If I just unload to you what I felt, and you just keep on egging me on by asking me more about what happened, that makes me feel really close and connected to you. I know you're there for me. You're empathizing with me. And that feels good in the moment. But what happens when I leave that conversation if that's all we do? I still have the problem. And if anything, the problem's even more activated in my head because we just kept talking about it. So I continue to ruminate. And so there's actually research which shows that if you just vent, you feel closer to the other person, but it actually keeps your problems alive. The best kinds of conversations do two things. First, you do share what you're feeling with the person you're talking to a little bit. The other person needs to learn about what you're going through, right? And a little bit of empathy is a good thing. But at a certain point in the conversation, they nudge you to do what, you just described happened to that Navy SEAL. They nudge you to think a little bit differently about it. All right, so if you come to me, Brian, I hear about the really bad guest you had on the show was driving you nuts. Brian, but you have so many guests, so many interviews have gone so well for you. So can't you put it in perspective? Or maybe I say, well, let me tell you about how I've dealt with that kind of situation. Right. So you're doing two things. You're validating the other person's feelings, but helping them also reframe it. Right. And that's not what a lot of people do.
Rule number 8, use your language.
I've been studying this for 20 years. I've been thinking about it for 37. I had a dad who was somewhat unconventional. He wasn't a college grad or he didn't spend his life teaching about philosophy, but he spent his time reading about it, in particular Eastern philosophy, Buddhism, Hinduism, the whole 9 yards. And he talked to me as a 3-year-old, starting as a 3-year-old, about it. And one of the things he impressed upon me at a young age was when problems happened, I should go inside, introspect, find a solution, and then move on with my life. And that was a lesson that I internalized, and it really served me well throughout my childhood and adolescence. Things happened. I wasn't happy. I introspected, found a solution. I moved on. Then I got to college and I took my first psychology class, and I learned that, hey, a lot of people, it's not just my dad who taught people to do that. A lot of folks somehow learned to do this as well, but they're not always successful. Oftentimes, introspecting, turning our attention inward to reflect on our lives and our problems, that often makes them worse. And it leads to things like depression and anxiety and various other kinds of negative conditions. And so for me, from that point on, I was hooked. The challenge for me became, well, why does introspection sometimes help and sometimes hurt? And I went to graduate school to try to work on that problem. And I've spent my career doing it ever since. And so then rewind about 10 years into my career, we published a paper that got a lot of attention. It was really exciting. I went on TV. My parents were like watching with popcorn, great event, and then a couple of days later, I got a really hostile, threatening letter in the mail, the kind of letter that, no one wants to receive. Slurs, threats, drawings. Had to go to the police station. They didn't make me file a report, but spoke to a police officer about it. And for the next couple of nights, I spent those nights pacing the house with a baseball bat. My wife and I had our first child. I'm thinking to myself, what have I done? Yeah, I had to go on TV. I got everyone in a mess, and can I leave? And it was really deeply disturbing. And there is a bit of an irony there because, yes, I was studying chatter at that time for quite a while, but incapable of pulling myself out of it in the moment. Now, one of the things we know about people in general is something called Solomon's paradox, named after the Bible's King Solomon. We are much better at advising other people than taking our own advice. And I was living that experience of Solomon's paradox in that moment. Fortunately, I did stumble on something that helped me. It's actually a tool that I went on to study and is described in the book. I was able to get some distance, some mental space from the experience and realize I wasn't being objective. And I did it through what at the time seemed like a strange quirk of language. I actually talked to myself in my head like I was talking to a friend or someone else, and actually used my name. And I said, Ethan, what are you doing at 3 a.m. with a baseball bat? go to sleep, and actually that talking to myself like I was someone else and using language to do it really helped me break myself out of that chatter funk.
Rule number 9, allow pain in small doses.
Negative emotions aren't something that we should be trying to avoid. We evolved the capacity to experience negative emotions for a reason. They provide us with really useful information that we can use to manage ourselves. And one of the best examples of this is there are children who are born into the world each year with the inability to experience physical pain. So it's a genetic anomaly.
They can't feel. I punch you in the face, you don't feel it.
You don't feel physical pain.
I stab you with a knife, you don't feel the pain. Really?
It's a genetic polymorphism. It's in the book.
Break a bone, you don't feel the pain.
You do not feel the pain, right? So it's a mutation. Wow. It's a quirk of genetics, and you can't feel the pain. What happens to these children is they die young.
Oh, because they're putting hand on the fire, they're hitting their head over and over again.
You got it. So pain is useful in small doses. It's really helpful that if I put my hand on the flame, I pull it away. The pain, the negativity is what makes that such an amazingly adaptive response. So let's go away from extreme examples. If I've got a big performance coming up, a big event, thousands of people, and a couple of weeks before, the whispers. Steven Spielberg talks about these as whispers in his ear.
You're never gonna make it.
Right? Oh my God!
You're not good enough.
Thousands of people. You've got to get right. A little bit of anxiety bubbles up. Really useful because you know what happens. Then I start working on the presentation. Make
sure you're prepared.
And I practice. So negativity, negative emotions in small doses, elegantly adaptive. When the negative emotions become harmful, is when they become more chronic.
And rule number 10, the last one before a very special bonus clip, is stop talking excessively.
We also know that when people experience chatter, that can create friction in our relationships. And it can do so through a few different pathways. One thing that happens is when people experience chatter, they're often highly motivated to talk to other people about it, right? And maybe we'll talk about why that is later. But one of the things that often happens is they talk about their chatter, and they keep talking about it, and they keep talking about it, and they keep talking about it. And that can have the effect of pushing other people that we know and love away, because there's only so much listening that our friends and loved ones can do. And so there's research which shows that talking excessively about what's happening in our head can have negative relational effects. Chatter can also lead to something called displaced emotion. So this is the phenomenon, right? Something stressful happens at work. I'm consumed with it. It's really annoying me. I come home, I'm at my desk. My daughter comes in my office and interrupts me. It's an innocent interruption, but why did you interrupt me? Right? We're displacing our emotion on someone else. It's a very common phenomenon. And so that's another way that chatter can impact our relationships and cause relational damage.
Now I've got some special bonus clips that I think you're going to enjoy. But before that, it's time for the question of the day. I want to know, what was your single biggest takeaway from this video and your plan of action for the next week? When you just watch a video and you get motivated, the science says you have a 35% chance of actually following through. That's not good enough, Believe Nation. We need to take some action. But when you watch a video, you get motivated and you create a specific plan of action, that number jumps from 35% to 91% chance of you following through. And when you publicly commit to other people, like leaving a comment down in this video, your number jumps to 95% chance of you actually following through on the plan you set for yourself. So I want to know your single biggest takeaway from this video and your plan of action for the next week. Leave it down in the comments below so I can celebrate you.
There are situations, though, and this touches on what you just described about you being synergistic and liking to talk. Some people don't like to talk about their problems, right. And sometimes we see our friends and loved ones struggling and they don't ask us for help. And there's something else you could do in those situations, which I talk about in the book, which is you try to help them invisibly. It's called invisible support. So here's an example of that. So my daughter is maybe struggling with her homework, and I see it. Look, I'm a professional, right? I'm a professor. I can help with fifth grade math. Hey, sweetie, let me show you how to do that. Instantly, you know, the fists on the. Did I ask you for help?
Do you think I don't know how to do it? And then I feel like crap and the fighting begins and not good, right? I've essentially threatened her sense of self-worth and so forth. Not good. So in those situations, though, there are other things that we can do to help people. So let's say my wife is really stressed out at work, and I know she could use some help, but she doesn't ask me for it. I can help her indirectly, right? I can do things as trivial as, pick up the dry cleaning or take care of dinner, do things to make it easier for her to work through the problems she's struggling with. Or if I know she's really struggling with a client at work, she's a nutritionist, maybe I indirectly give her some advice about how to help. Like, hey, have you seen this interesting talk? It looks really relevant to a lot of the stuff we do, right? So don't shine a spotlight on, oh, I know you're struggling, let me tell you what to do, but give her the information some other way. Research shows that can be really helpful. Those invisible ways of helping can be useful for relationships.
If you want to see the top 10 I did on Benjamin Hardy, check it out right there next to me. I think you'll love it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
And you need a really exciting, compelling future. You can develop skills and abilities to allow you to 10x your income. All you have to do is know what's valuable in the market, know what's the need, look for what's going on, and ultimately develop skills and abilities.